Hey, what's going on, you guys? It's Ace High. Today we're going to take one step back. So the last video on our Roman series that we watched was Caesar crossing the Rubicon and clearly starting up civil war. Well, I was a little bit confused by this because I kind of see how his power was going and the direction he was going and the feuds he had, but I didn't fully understand exactly what pushed him over the edge. And that's when you guys let me know that I missed one of the key videos in this series, and it's actually called His Year Pompey. So it's or His Years Pompey. So it talks about 56 to 52 BC, all about Pompey, and I'm assuming based off how the comments were, what really pushes Caesar over the edge to the point that yeah, now he's marching on Rome, you know. So we're taking a step back. We're going to watch this video by Historia Civilis, and then tomorrow we're going to be watching we'll zoom back forward and we'll watch, I think it's called Caesar Invades Rome, or Caesar Marches on Rome, or something like that. So it's about to get heated. That being said, though, if you guys are new to the channel, hit that like button, hit that sub, comment, let me know what you want to see, because I do try to reply to every comment. If I can, I miss some. It's going to be a lot of them, and I'm actually working on getting a Discord channel set up. That way that I can sort them a little bit easier. It'll probably be a couple more weeks until I have that out, but when I have it, I'll let you guys know. That being said, I'm going to sit back, I'm going to shut up, and let's just get watching, okay?
When we last left the city of Rome, it was falling headlong into anarchy.
Yeah.
The radical Senator Clodius had transformed himself into a man of the people, and through the use of street gangs, had disrupted public life in the city. Another senator, a conservative named Milo, had responded by raising street gangs of his own. Public life had slowly returned to normal, but at the cost of violence on the streets and political uncertainty. Milo, the conservative, looked to the courts to bring an end to the violence. He brought a case against Clodius, accusing him of inciting violence.
I think
Everybody
he's right.
knew that Clodius was guilty, but he was able to bribe and threaten his way to a not guilty verdict. As a big ol'
Dude, it's incredible how much, I mean, there's corruption everywhere in the world, but there was a lot of corruption in the Republic.
middle finger to Milo, Clodius then brought an identical case against him. Everybody knew that Milo was guilty too, but that didn't stop the Senate from running to his defense. At the trial, as Pompey was speaking on Milo's behalf, Clodius turned to his supporters in the crowd, and together they drowned out Pompey with an obnoxious chant.
I agree Milo is guilty of inciting violence. That being said, he kind of fought fire with fire. He was the second one. I mean, if Milo goes down, both of them should, you know?
Clodius would shout, "Who's starving the people to death?" And the crowd would answer, "Pompey." They were referencing the fact that Pompey had been put in charge of Rome's grain supply. Then Clodius would shout, "Who wants to campaign in the east?" And the crowd would answer, "Pompey." There were rumblings that the Senate was going to pick somebody to lead an army to Egypt, and Pompey was definitely interested in the job, so that one was true. Then Clodius would shout, "Who should go instead?" And the crowd would answer, "Crassus." Crassus? Pompey's ally? What did he have to do with this? There had always been unsubstantiated rumors that Crassus was secretly funding Clodius's street violence, and this seemed to confirm that there was some sort of arrangement between the two men.
That's interesting, because that is a major fork that I didn't realize when I watched the Crassus video. So we all know what Crassus, he went out east. That's where he ended up dying. It broke the whole triangle of power between the three of them. But this probably made him suspicious if Crassus confirmed it, and probably also kind of made him a little bit nervous about Caesar, in the sense, because is he working together with him, or what's going on, you know?
Chants soon died away, and Clodius's supporters changed tactics, spitting at Pompey. Before too long, this caused a fight, mostly because it's bad manners. In the struggle that followed, Pompey was pulled down off the speaking platform. He escaped injured. The trial was called off. After the brawl, Crassus started to make a series of public speeches, arguing that the Senate should put him, and not Pompey, in charge of the yet-to-be-formalized expedition to the east. Pompey's worst fears were confirmed. The two men were coordinating. This was dangerous. Pompey privately confessed to Cicero that he feared that Crassus would send assassins after him. When it was time for candidates to declare themselves for next year's consulship, the conservatives put forward Cato's brother-in-law, a man named Domitus.
Okay.
If elected, he pledged to recall Caesar from Gaul and take over his command. It was in this context that Caesar summoned Pompey and Crassus to come and meet with him at what we now call the Conference of Luca. Pompey and Crassus were at each other's throats, and Caesar's command was in jeopardy. The secret alliance between these three men, the triumvirate, was splintering.
Right.
Caesar's political survival depended on Domitus going down in defeat. This is when Caesar suggested that Pompey and Crassus should run against Dominus on a joint ticket. If they won,
that's huge.
Pompey and Crassus would have the power to extend Caesar's governorship and secure prestigious governorships for themselves. The three men agreed. As we know, Pompey would get Spain and Crassus would get Syria. The two men returned to Rome, with their alliance renewed. Around this time, Caesar sent a message to Clodius to negotiate a side deal. If Clodius would agree to throw his support behind Pompey and Crassus this year, the triumvirate would agree to support his older brother's bid for consul next year. Clodius agreed. This was an ingenious bit of politicking on Caesar's part. It was spring now,
smart.
and the elections were scheduled for the summer.
Especially considering that how much influence Clodius had at the time, you know? With all these riots and everything, he really did have a lot of followers.
Pompey and Crassus immediately declared their candidacies and started campaigning. But they needed more time, so Clodius summoned his street gangs and did everything he could to disrupt public business. It worked, and the elections were postponed for the sake of public safety. But Clodius's tactics didn't make him any friends. At one point, when the Senate was scheduled to meet, a bunch of his fellow senators physically blocked Clodius from entering the building. Clodius promised that if they didn't let him in, he'd have the Senate house burned down. Yikes.
Jesus.
Summer turned to autumn and then winter, and still,
I mean, to be fair, they had no right to keep him out if he's a senator.
no elections. When the snows came in Gaul, Caesar allowed his men to travel to Rome as private citizens to vote. And so, late in the year, thousands of off-duty soldiers showed up in the city, and then, coincidentally, the street violence stopped. Elections were scheduled for January. On the last day of the year, Rome's two consuls stepped down, and there was nobody there to replace them.
You know, it's kind of ingenious, if you think about it. Caesar works with Claudius to postpone and postpone and postpone until it's winter and he's hunkered down. Now he can send everybody back to vote. It's just so smart.
On the day of the election, before dawn, a group of conservatives, led by Cato and Domitus, their candidate for consul, showed up at the voting grounds. They wanted to be there early, to make sure that there was no funny business. But there was funny business. A bunch of Pompey and Crassus's supporters were already there, armed. They attacked the conservatives, killing some and driving the rest away.
Jesus.
Apparently, Cato was wounded while defending Domitus. After the sun rose, Caesar's soldiers and Clodius's gang members came forward to cast their votes. Pompey and Crassus won their elections easily, surprising nobody. Since this election was taking place in January, the two men assumed office immediately. When elections happened, they were supposed to be overseen by consuls. This led to this weird scenario, where Pompey and Crassus were immediately responsible for overseeing the election that they had just participated in. The elections for praetor happened next, and this year Cato was a candidate. As Cato was in the process of winning his election, Pompey arbitrarily dissolved the assembly, citing bad omens. Then, after his armed thugs made their rounds, he started up the voting again. This time, weirdly, a bunch of people switched their votes, and Cato did not win. It was obvious to everybody what Pompey had done, and many in the crowd were upset. Then, they elected the aediles. Pompey began picking and choosing which elections were valid and which were not. coincidentally, his allies got in, and everybody else had their results thrown out. This was too much for people to handle. Pompey had gone mad with power. There was
Jesus.
some pushing and shoving in the election pens. Both factions had secretly brought weapons, and things got deadly pretty quickly. At the end of the day, Pompey returned home victorious, but covered in blood. When his pregnant wife saw him, she fainted, and would later have a miscarriage.
Oh, wow.
His wife, by the way, was Caesar's daughter, Julia.
Yeah.
The marriage had been arranged years earlier to cement Caesar and Pompey's alliance through the triumvirate. Once the dust had settled, Pompey and Crassus had an ally in the Senate introduce legislation giving 5-year governorships to Pompey and Crassus, and a 5-year extension to Caesar.
Something interesting they said that she just had a miscarriage, so she's married, and it links Caesar and Pompey. But her miscarrying his child, I wonder if that'll put any strain on Caesar and Pompey's relationship, you know?
As agreed, Pompey would get Spain, Crassus would get Syria, and Caesar would stay in Gaul. But these weren't normal governorships. The legislation also gave the governors authority to unilaterally declare war, without consulting the Senate. This ruffled a lot of feathers, but eventually the legislation passed, and their obligation to the triumvirate was fulfilled. And then our sources get a little patchy. But in the fall, we know that the elections were held for the year 54 BCE. Pompey and Crassus supported Clodius's older brother for consul, just as they had promised. He won his election, but so did Domitus, Cato's conservative brother-in-law that ran last year. In the winter, Crassus departed for Syria. He would not return, but we'll get to that another day.
Yeah, we watched that video.
Pompey decided to ignore his previous agreement with Caesar and Crassus and stay in Rome instead.
Sorry to pause it again, but I thought, how did Crassus die? I asked this before, and I thought somebody said, rumor was that he died from like having melted gold poured over him to show that not even his wealth can save him, or something like that. That might just be a rumor, or maybe that was about somebody else, but I thought that was about Crassus.
Of going to Spain. His reasoning was this: let Crassus win victories in Syria. Let Caesar win victories in Gaul. Pompey's military career was already unparalleled. They called him the next Alexander the Great. He had nothing left to prove.
Wow.
He would stay in Rome, free from Caesar and Crassus's influence, and establish himself as the most powerful man in the city. His subordinates would govern Spain in his absence. He ended the year by throwing expensive public games. Apparently the big draw was elephant versus elephant fights, which people seemed to like.
Was the Roman Colosseum a thing yet? Like, when was that built? Was that built like during Caesar's time, or was that built before Caesar, after Caesar? Pretty sure Augustus used the Colosseum at one point or another, so I'd assume it was before him, but...
The games went over pretty well, and Pompey's popularity began to rise. And then, in 54 BCE, his wife unexpectedly died in childbirth.
Oh, wow.
Pompey was genuinely heartbroken.
That's right. They talked about that in a different episode. I remember that. But that kind of fractures the glue between these two, you know? It makes it at least a lot easier to break.
And spent a good portion of the year in mourning. Caesar was off campaigning in Britain that summer, and wouldn't learn about his daughter's death until he returned to the Gallic coast in the fall. Now, the legal bond between Pompey and Caesar was severed, and the triumvirate was back to being as fragile as ever. When the elections for that year rolled around, there was a massive corruption scandal. All of the candidates for consul were caught bribing the consuls who would be overseeing their election. Last year, Pompey had shown everybody how easy it was to pick winners and losers, and everybody was interested in replicating his success. But, fortunately, they were all caught before any of this could happen. Everybody was disqualified, and the election was pushed back 6 months so that new candidates could be found. With violence on the streets and corrupt elections, Romans were feeling like the political system was becoming more and more unstable. People
That's because it is.
began to whisper that Pompey should step up and reestablish order. The word dictator started to be thrown around.
Okay.
Before too long, brand new candidates were campaigning for consul. One of the candidates was Milo, the conservative senator and leader of half of the city's street gangs.
Okay.
To Clodius,
I kind of like Milo. Not gonna lie, I like him better than Clodius for sure.
the leader of the other half of the city's street gangs, this was unacceptable. Clodius decided that if Milo was running, there would be no election. He took to the streets, and Rome descended into anarchy. Clodius's gangs and Milo's gangs clashed all over the city. There were deaths every day, and corpses were just left lying openly on the streets.
Jesus.
Public business ground to a halt. This continued for months, and the elections kept on being pushed back. When January 1st rolled around, there had been no elections, which meant that, again, there were no new consuls there to assume office. One day in late January, Milo was leaving Rome on business, and just happened to meet Clodius returning to the city on the same road. Each man was flanked by armed bodyguards. The groups almost passed in peace, but two gladiators working for Milo couldn't keep their mouths shut, and started taunting Clodius's men. Fighting broke out spontaneously. In the confusion, Clodius was hit in the shoulder with a javelin.
Jesus.
Clodius's men tried to rush him into a building, but Milo's men overpowered them. Clodius was killed, and his body was just left on the road.
Oh my god, well I guess that's how he's done.
Eventually, a traveler recognized Clodius's body and had it sent to Rome. When it got to Rome, news spread of Clodius's death. An angry mob gathered. They took his body and marched toward the Forum. They had intended to hold a funeral in the Forum, but instead, the mob stormed the Senate House. They took tables, chairs, benches, and anything else that would burn, and piled it in the center of the Senate chamber.
Oh my god, they're gonna burn
Clodius's
it down.
body was laid atop the makeshift pyre, and the wood was ignited. In death, Clodius fulfilled his promise. His funeral pyre burned the Senate House down.
Jesus.
Rome's senators
What? I got a question. With all these fires going on, when I picture like ancient Roman days, I picture a guy with a bucket trying to put out a fire. What were the firemen basically type of job back then? Like if there was a fire, how did you put it out? Did you just throw a bucket onto it? Because if this whole building's on fire, you might burn down 3, 4, 5 other buildings as it spreads, you know, or the whole city.
were horrified by this. Rome had been ungovernable for months, but if an angry mob could burn down the Senate, an angry mob could overthrow the government. The whispering intensified. Dictator. The people wanted Pompey to restore order. Everybody was now taking the threat of the mob seriously, but the conservatives in the Senate had an understandable aversion to dictators. So they struck a compromise. Pompey would be allowed to rule as sole consul in the year 52. This was super duper illegal.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I thought the whole point of 2 consuls was to kind of control each other.
First, there had to be a 10-year gap between consulships.
And that, yeah.
That was the law. Pompey had served only 3 years earlier.
Huh.
Second, there was no election. The Senate just decided that Pompey would be the next consul. Since
So it's basically dictator.
when was that a thing? But nevertheless, in the year 52 BCE, Pompey assumed power. When they had their consul in place, Bibulus, maybe you've heard of him, put forward some legislation. The Senatus Consultum Ultimum, the final act. This special piece of legislation gave the consuls, in this case just Pompey, unrestricted power to defend the Republic.
Okay.
It was the Roman equivalent to martial law. The bill passed without much debate. Pompey immediately raised an army and had it enter the city. Just like that, Rome was under military occupation. Legionaries patrolled the streets and fought the street gangs whenever they were found. Eventually, with soldiers on every street corner, people began to go about their daily lives again. As an olive branch, Pompey had Milo arrested for Clodius's murder. Milo was found guilty and was exiled from Rome.
That's it? They didn't kill him?
The army patrolled the streets for about a month.
Does anybody know what happened to Milo after he was put into exile? I mean, if it's, going to be brought up later in the series, then don't worry about telling me. But if not, let me know if you know.
Peace was restored, and Pompey was the most powerful man in Rome. This is exactly what he wanted.
It's probably not what Caesar wanted, though.
Finally, Pompey...
Oh, is that why Caesar turned around and marched on Rome? Hang on, it's all clicking now.
had decided that the crisis had passed, and that it was time to relinquish his extra-legal authority.
Oh, wow.
Somewhere in this period, Pompey remarried. He invited his new father-in-law, a leading conservative, to serve with him as consul for the remainder of the year. Again, no election was held. They were just making it up as they went along. Together, Pompey and his father-in-law passed a string of conservative reforms, such as a prohibition on candidates standing for office in absentia. This was an indirect attack on Caesar of all people, since it would force him to give up his command early and get dragged into court over his illegal actions during his term as consul. Pompey and Caesar's alliance was broken. The triumvirate was dead. Pompey achieved his dream of becoming the most powerful man in Rome by openly abandoning Caesar's reform faction and transforming himself into the champion of the conservative cause.
Okay. Alright. I am happy. I'm actually really stoked that you guys had me watch that. It was several of you that brought up the point that I missed that one, and that makes a hell of a lot more sense now. I completely understand everything I missed, and I'm glad I watched it, seriously. Tomorrow we're going to be hopping back forward past when Caesar crossed the Rubicon into Caesar, I think it's called Caesar Marches on Rome, or Caesar enters Rome or something like that. But Caesar's back, and he's not very happy. So, I hope you guys stick around for that. Till next time, I love y'all. This is Ace and I'm out.